Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. This is brought to you by the illustrious, wonderful, and what my shirt says, Browncroft Community Church. My name is Peter Engler. I'm one of the co-hosts here. We're here with our producer, Nathan. I'm here with our co-host, Aaron Mercer. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Good to be on.
This is probably one of the most universal topics that I hear about. And it's one of the biggest questions I get as a pastor. So do you know what pastors are really great at doing? They don't always know how to answer a question, so they just bring in an expert to answer it. Does that sound good?
That's a great idea.
So we have Elena Brubaker. She's a mental health counselor in Rochester, New York. She has a passion around this question, and however you want to call it, but it's as simply put, why can't I do it all?
Wow, that is a big question, and I think it's a question that a lot of people wrestle with, particularly in our society. I'm really excited to learn how I don't have to wrestle with that anymore. So I'm glad we brought the expert in on this one.
Well, we love to bring in mental health therapists because then we get free therapy. So there you go.
There you go. Well, yeah. So thanks so much for being here, Elena. It's really great to have you on the podcast, and I'd love to learn a little bit more. This is the first time I'm actually meeting you, so I'd love to learn more about your story and how you got into this mental health profession.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. I think this is going to be an excellent conversation. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I went to University of Rochester for their marriage and family therapy program. And since then have been in various clinics, and now have been in private practice for the past 4 years. And have just developed a passion around this topic of releasing people from the pressure of trying to do way too much.
So let's think about this. Let's back up. I think this is kind of a timely episode. So let's talk about you for a second. Pandemic hits about 18 months ago, last year. How did it affect you?
Yeah. So when it first hit, I had to bring my whole practice online. My daughter came out of school. So my husband started working from home, everything kind of grounded to a halt. You know what I mean? And for the first month, it was probably my slowest month of private practice because people thought it's going to be 2 weeks. So I don't want to do an online session. I'm not into that. And so people for the month of March, I saw a really limited number because people were waiting till things got back to normal. You know, at that point it was a 2-week shutdown. So they thought, I'm going to wait till I can come back in person. Yeah. And then by April, everyone was back. My whole practice was online and tried to figure things out from there. So it was a lot of recalibrating and adjusting the plan. And as a private practice owner, that's my small business. So I was having to make those decisions on my own, taking in the public health information and taking in my clients' mental health states and figuring out what to do to stay completely online, to move to some in-person sessions. So it was just a lot to process and to manage and to kind of know that at the end of the day, the onus of the decision is on me, which I've loved that freedom in private practice, but in this context, it was really intimidating because I'm balancing this physical health versus mental health. And that was a lot. It was a lot to process.
I want to jump on one thing because I'm connected to a lot of counselors and just, maybe as you apply this question to your own life, you mentioned the in-person versus, online. And I think one of the things that I've heard from mental health counselors are there are some people that legitimately they need to do it in person, whether they just don't have technical skills or whether they, just maybe the nature of the therapy, it just has to be done and I don't want to get all nerdy, but EMDR. Yeah. So you can Google that. How did you kind of navigate that knowing that maybe 80% or 90% of your clients were good one way, but then trying to figure out when do I make an exception? Because I can't do it all, but you want to be fair and you want to help. So I don't know. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. And that's so true. And I really found that some people, it was a seamless transition into virtual therapy, and other people were just struggling. Like they hated it. They hated virtual. They're like, this is helping kinda, but this is really not great. And so for me, I took a gradual approach back into in-person, both to see, okay, how does this work? What are kind of like the physical health details I need to think about? What are the, do I need to have people sign a waiver? But it felt okay gradually introducing some in-person sessions. And I monitored that based off of kind of assessing my caseload and seeing how people are doing, because what was really hard is to see someone who is suffering with online who I knew would do better coming back in person. So that's kind of how I based my decision. Of course, I had like the health, the physical health and the COVID stuff in mind, but really I took a look at my caseload and who would be doing better overall coming back in person, and those are the people who I invited back first.
I imagine that in that time it changed. Certainly being online is a different environment, but the pandemic forced us to pause in some ways, at least certain activities, but it didn't necessarily pause. It didn't pause our day-to-day lives, at least in a lot of ways. So how did you see that come through at that time, and then as the summer went on? Like, how did you see that come through in your practice? Like, was it hard for people to kind of be in that new situation? Like, tell me, we're talking about why we can't do it at all, but we were kind of forced to pause.
Yeah.
What did that do?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that some people, and it tended to be my more anxious people, felt less anxious. Really interesting. I'm not saying this across the board, but there was one client who said something along the lines of like, I've always been worried and now the rest of the world is with me. Everybody else is worried too. And so that takes some of the pressure. Like, I don't have to worry so much because now other people are worried too. And so I don't have to have the burden of I'm the only one who's thinking about this. Everybody is. And so I found that for some people, this really benefited them. The slowing down, particularly the people who are trying to do too much, felt a relief that life had to stop, certain parts of it, and they could say no to things because they had the pandemic as a reason. And so for some people, it brought relief. And then for other people, it just, whatever they were avoiding, whatever kind of was like under the surface, it brought it all out. So I felt like I saw it go both ways. Some people really benefiting, and then some people like that all the things that they had been avoiding and pushing down. Maybe it was a challenging relationship. Maybe it was a soul-sucking job. The pandemic forced them to look at it. So the stuff they've been avoiding looking at, they had to.
Man, Aaron, I love that question, Elena. I love that response because I want to test a theory out. Just because I probably saw the pandemic more as a very unfortunate opportunity. So it really focused me. I wish there was a better way, but like what you said, it was about no. And I read this book called The Paradox of Choice. And so like one of the examples was they went into a grocery store and they literally went from having 20 different types of jam to 3. And they actually found that sales went up, customers were happier. So my thought even too with people that are really anxious, and I'm curious, I'm testing this out, so who knows, we might edit this out, but was the pandemic not just everybody's worried, now they understand what I feel, but was it a little bit of, oh man, I don't have a fear of missing out. I don't have unlimited options. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think that theory, we can just take a small sample size of people in my life, both personally and professionally. But I think that's definitely part of it. Is part of anxiety is the overwhelm. of there's so much happening. And so when you strip away so much of that, I think there is more calm in there's less. So there's less to choose from. There's less obligations, you know? There's less on your calendar. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that theory is true, that the less really helped some people's anxiety.
So let's move, because the reason we want to bring up the pandemic, and Aaron might even have some thoughts too, but we're about to reopen at some point. So I say some point, we could have another spike. We're recording this episode in May. It comes out in June. So I am not Fauci. We're guessing here. Okay. But so we're talking about why can't I do it all? Calendars are going to open up. Mm-hmm. There's going to be more opportunities. They're changing mask stuff. What do you anticipate as a mental health therapist of challenges and opportunities, maybe for both that you've talked about?
Yeah. So I feel like I'm already hearing about this from my clients, because, with vaccines and things, there's like a partial opening feeling right now. And I just had someone say the other day, like, I don't have a reason to say no anymore. Right. That's so interesting. I don't have a reason to say no anymore. So anxiety spiking again because I don't have my built-in reason. It's a pandemic. And so now my calendar's filling up and now I'm starting to feel anxious. Now we have these obligations. We have the social calendar. We have maybe boundaries stuff that you've pushed off. It's coming back up again because now we don't have our built-in boundary of it's a pandemic. And so I think for some people, there's anxiety about adding more. There's this word that has come out, languishing. It's like between, it's not quite depression, but it's not like you're living your best life. And I think a lot of people, like, as things are looking at reopening, it's kind of this languishing, like we've been kind of used to this for a year and now we're not sure what life is going to look like. And you don't feel really excited about anything. I think because so much excitement has been stripped away. It's like so much has been taken away that you almost don't know what to trust in. Like even like what you were saying, like there's so many caveats. We think things are going to look better in June. We don't know. And so I think that feeling has made people feel guarded. But on the other hand, I think there are people who are genuinely excited. I think especially of like my extroverts, they're excited to see people and have big gatherings. And so I think there's both. I think there's languishing, I think there's anxiety, and I think there's people who are excited and joyful too.
Mm-hmm. Well, so why, you mentioned how the pandemic gave people an excuse, not an excuse. It was a good reason. Mm-hmm. It's not an excuse. But if that is becoming not always something you can point to, like, why is there that pressure? I think we all feel it, but why is there the pressure to fill up our calendars and to, I think we could probably get to a different question of why do we feel like we have to jump in and make things happen? But let's just talk about the calendar side of it. Why do we have to fill that? Why do we got a chance to pause and now all of a sudden we want to go back to full speed? What is that all about?
Yeah. And I think I don't think a lot of people want to go back to full speed, but they feel like they have to. There's a pressure, there's a guilt, there's the shoulds. I should go back to full speed, but I don't think a lot of people want to do that. And then that's really what's come up is like, I was going full speed and I didn't like it. I was struggling with it. I was suffering under that full speed. And so what I'm hoping is people consider, like, what speed do I want to go back to? But I think to that question, I think there's a lot of cultural pressure to have your calendar look a certain way. I think social media plays a big part. You see on social media, this person seems to be doing X, Y, Z. So I should maybe try to do that too. Or this, I see this account and they seem to have so much going on. So who am I to say something different? So I think you societally look around and feel pressure. I think you look at your social media and feel pressure. And so I think there's this cultural value of being busy, of things being full. And if, like, even if I think about conversations with people, especially pre-pandemic, it's like, how are you? Busy. Things are busy. Yeah, I got a lot going on. And so it does give you this idea like, well, what if I'm not busy? And what if my life isn't as full? And what if I don't have a lot going on? I think there's worth questions that come up there. I think there's a fear of like, am I doing it right if I'm not busy, if my life isn't full, if my life isn't brimming over with stuff? What if I'm doing it wrong? So I think there's fear in there too.
Well, I mean, for you, Aaron, because again, we're getting free therapy, but we'll let Elaine answer this. But it's terrible. It's recorded, so Kristen, your wife, can see this, and Robin, So, anyways, I mean, I don't relate to the social media, and I know that a lot of people do, and maybe that's a surprise because I'm fairly active on social media. I kind of look at social media as like a necessary evil. Like, this is part of my job. This is part of what I do. But I think what my wife and I struggle with is if somebody asks us to do something and we say no, we're probably never going to get that opportunity again. Now that's like really, really extreme. So, you have a couple that you really like. I feel like this is an Everybody Loves Raymond, sitcom, like, hey, can you get together with us Friday night at 8:00? Honestly, Friday night, 8:00, I want to be in bed. But if I say no, I don't know. Is there a reason for you that you feel like you can't say it all or do it all? I mean, and I'd be curious, maybe you said yours,
I think it's always a challenge because there are opportunities that come up and it's hard to say no to weigh them. But I guess I'm one who I don't like having a totally full calendar because that stresses me out. But I think that there was something to the idea that everyone is having to slow down a bit. But I know that that's not necessarily I think especially in America, we just like other countries I think have different contexts, but in our country, we're very much like go, go, go. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And it's just really interesting to hear you talk about that. It's interesting to hear it from the perspective of someone who had the ability to put up a barrier, and now that barrier is not there, so that they probably have to find it. They have to find it in themselves to give a barrier. But then there's also people who want to fill their calendar up. And so maybe they don't want to, but they feel like they need to. So I guess there's like a give and take there, how do you get to the happy medium here? What have you found? What do you think? What do you suggest?
Well, one, I think not doing so much comparison, not thinking there's a one size fits all, like that Peter's social calendar should be what yours looks like, should be what mine looks like, but to honor that we all are going to have a different capacity and what works best for us and our family and our season of life. Because I think sometimes we expect ourselves to run the same pace for all of our life. We should be able to do what we did 5 years ago and don't really take into context different seasons of life, different things that are going on. So one thing that I encourage my clients to do is to look at their values. So what do you value? And those values help you sort through, what do you want to prioritize? What do you want to say yes to? Because when you say yes to one thing, you say no to something else. And when you say no to something, you can say yes to something else. So I think those values and being aware of what are your particular individual values, family values, that helps you filter through what do you let in and what do you need to, even if it's a good thing, even if it's an exciting thing, what do you need to leave, behind for now? And it might come back again, but I think looking at those values helps you realize what you want to prioritize, and then honoring your season of life. Okay, for this season, we can't do this thing, or my kids are going to school next fall, so I'm looking at, I might be adding some things in. So that season of life is changing. So I might be adding things back in the fall. So I don't think it's always like less, less, less. Sometimes it's more, but it's being intentional about what you're filling your time with and not just like, you asked me, so I have to say yes.
Well, which one are you? Are you the I want to fill my calendar, or are you I don't want to fill my man? I am knocking this mic down. I'm like all Italian excited. Go Pacciano family, my mom's maiden name. So, which one do you think you're at?
I'm a little bit more towards the less side, which is a shift because 10 years ago, Elena was fill it all. Like anything, if someone asked me to do something, my answer is yes. I have, 3 things in one day. That's fine. But my work as a therapist and then further having kids really taught me a lot about doing less and slowed me down in a good way of like, this pace is no longer working for you, Elena. You used to 10 years ago be able to say yes to everything and have a really full calendar. And I tried to do that, tried to kind of go at the same pace. And I really learned the hard way that is, I'm not at my best self now. If I'm saying yes to everything and if I'm having that very full calendar.
Well, so, I mean, we're talking a lot about just the quantitative calendar, but I think we probably should talk about the qualitative, because as I thought about this question and reflected on this, so my personality, like the way I go after email is I go from like my least favorite to favorite. Like, so in 5th grade, I had to do vocabulary words. So we had to look it up in the dictionary, and we had time on Friday morning to get that done. So I said, man, if I get this done, I'll be free to do whatever I want over the weekend. So I kind of took that into my professional life.
Now I know why he doesn't answer my emails. The least favorite emails, right?
Well, yeah, start with the least favorite,
Oh, I get him first then. Okay. I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Sorry.
If you got friends, enemies, neighbors, whatever you want to say. Anyways, we're big fans. But like, so I don't relate to the people that say, and again, not a bad thing, I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to do that. Like, I'd almost resent them, because like I wish that I could do that, so we don't need to get into the Enneagram, but like Enneagram 7s, like, I don't know how you do it. Like, you just.
What's your Enneagram number?
I'm an Enneagram 2.
Ooh, okay.
So it's all coming true.
Yeah.
We still got to get Aaron on there.
I don't even know what the different number. Everyone keeps on trying to predict what number I am, and I need to take the test, I guess.
Okay. Well, what's what's yours?
I'm between an 8 and a 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you're still trying to figure it out.
I'm still trying to figure it out because I can very much relate with both. Yeah, so I feel like I need a coach because I have like kind of what I know is my healthiest best self, and then I have the things that I struggle with. So I almost feel like I'm too in my head about it. So I feel like I need a coach to really help me through.
I need a code book, I think. Yes. Yeah, hopefully there's some listeners who can.
Marilyn Vansel, she was on our episode, so that's a good one. But anyways, we'll go there. He's been teaching. But so I feel this duty and call versus like people that are just like, I'm just going to do the next best thing. And I'm just like, I send the email out every week for Why God Why. Is it something that I necessarily want and enjoy to do? No, but I know it needs to get done and it needs to go to our listeners. And I feel the responsibility to get that done. Whereas I know other people would be like, oh, well, who cares about an email? Like, who cares about, and so I think what I struggle with this question is I feel like there's things that are duties to kind of let go of versus some people it's just, I don't know, which one. I feel like you're more of a duty type person. I don't know. I mean,
I think there's definitely responsibilities that we need to get done, and we have to plan those in and invest time in them. I think it's definitely worth evaluating what duties need to get done and what am I putting out there that maybe is not a good investment of time, that maybe is an extra thing that doesn't need. I mean, I think that for me, that's a constant thing I have to look at. And because everything you say yes to, like you said, Elaine, I mean, you're saying no to something else. And to me, that's something that it's important to evaluate. And I know that in a lot of professional settings, in particular, but in your day-to-day personal life too, you're always making those choices, and it's easy to want to jump in there and feel like a situation needs a little bit extra control. So why don't you jump in there and fix it? Maybe we don't always have to fix everything. I don't know. What do you think?
And are you a duty or I choose what I want? I mean, yeah.
I feel like I'm between. I feel like that's been a growth process for me, because I very much relate to actually both. Like, my college self would have been the fun, forget about the duty stuff. And then I got very into like the duty, and now, but that was burning me out. Saying yes, feeling like I had to do these things. And so now it really is like a values conversation. Like what you were saying, you could take that email through a values lens. You value this podcast. And so no, you don't enjoy everything that goes along with it, but because you value the podcast, you will do, the email. And the same thing for my private practice. I value my practice. I value my clients. And so there are things like notes. I don't want to do them. I don't like them. They bring me no joy, but I want to have a healthy private practice. And so I do those things, but they're aligned with my values. And so that helps, rather than maybe something that wouldn't be a big add to my practice. Say it's a networking event that I don't really want to go to. Well, will it add value to my private practice? And maybe sometimes the answer is yes, but maybe sometimes it's like, no, I don't need that right now. So this is something I'm going to release. Whereas this is something that I really need to do for my practice. So I kind of try to filter it out through there. So it's not all these things that feel like burden. It's more like, okay, this is necessary because I value this. And so that helps me bring a little bit more connection to it, be a little bit more motivated, because I know the purpose behind it. I think what I really don't like is when I just feel like I'm grinding, like I'm just doing, and I'm not connected, and it feels like just a laundry list of to-dos. Because then I don't feel that joy. I don't feel that connection in my life, and I really don't like that feeling.
So I mean, that was great. How much of that, when I hear you talking about that, the question comes to my mind, how much of it is pressure that, you mentioned social media before and whatnot, how much is it pressure that other people are putting on us versus how much is it pressure that we tend to put on ourselves? Like, if maybe sometimes we think that it'll be the end of the world if I don't go in and do X, Y, and Z, but other people might be like, well, it's not really that big of a deal. But then on the flip side, it could be you really need to do this, and you're thinking from other people, or at least the feeling of that. I mean, how much is that? How much does that play in?
I really think it can be both. Sometimes it's our own internal expectations of ourselves, and we have all these perceptions that we put on other people, like, oh, they're going to think I'm the worst if I say no to this. And then you say no and nobody cares. So sometimes it's the internal, like you're projecting that on other people. But then I do think that there can be people who do put pressure on you. Like, oh, you can't do this. What if you just came for a half an hour? What if you did this for half the day? Or what if we cut, there's pressure that other people put. But I also think we can teach people about our capacity. And so I think people who are yes people, then the others in their life, they expect them to say yes, because they always do. And so if that person is then trying to limit or set boundaries, there can be pushback because people are used to them doing a certain thing. And so it might not be anything malicious or they're not trying to hurt them. They just are expecting the version of them that they always get. So they're learning, oh, okay, apparently we're doing something new here. So I think there can be pressure from other people. But I think a lot of times it's internal. And so that's why I think it's important to first do that internal assessment of, okay, what do I have capacity for? What takes priority in this season of life? So then if you do get pushback from someone, you know why you're doing what you're doing. And so you're able to stand your ground. Maybe if you feel safe with the person, you can have a conversation about why you're saying no this time. But if you don't know like why you're doing what you're doing, then it's really easy to just fold and say, oh, okay, like you wanted me to do this. Okay, that's fine. I guess I will.
So let's get super practical. What are some symptoms that you generally see when someone says, I can't do it all, or FOMO, or whatever you want to say?
Anxiety is a big one.
Wait. What does FOMO mean?
Oh, man.
I don't even know.
The fear of missing out.
Oh, okay. Whew. All right, good. All right. I needed to I got to get the code book out of here, you know?
The lingo. You're going to leave with a lot of lingo
yeah,
today.
you know.
EMDR, FOMO, lots of things.
Well, those are two different,
Yes.
but anyways, But yeah, what are some of the symptoms?
Yeah, so anxiety and stress are big ones. That feeling of like you're running in circles and you can't stop. Resentment is a big one that comes along with feeling like you're trying to do too much. Like someone asked you to do something and it's just like, oh, can't do one more thing, but I'm going to because they asked me. So that resentment, I think comparison comes into everybody else can do this and I'm the only one who's struggling. And then worth low self-esteem, low self-worth, like I'm doing all these things and I still don't feel like enough. And you know, why aren't I feeling better about myself? I'm juggling all this stuff and I don't feel good about myself and I don't feel worthy. And so those are some big things I see. And I think all of that can lead to feeling down, feeling depressed, feeling low. Because I think when you go at such a fast pace, that can crash. And then you can feel really down.
Is it always down, or I don't want to add another term, but like, is there a manic state that you've seen, or do you see more people like, you know, do people actually try to produce more when they can't do it all? I mean, I don't know. Or is there always a crash? I shouldn't use the word always. I can hear my wife say, you can't say always, never, and quit shooting yourself. Anyways, that was for free.
Yeah, I agree. Not always, but I would say for the most part, I do see crashes. And that might be like a crisis of identity. It doesn't always have to be feeling down. I think there can be like stages of you add more. Like, okay, I'm still not feeling good, so I guess I'll do more to try to prove this. I'll try to hustle more. You know, what I need is one more thing. But I feel like most usually I do see a crash. And maybe that's because of what I see in my practice. But I do see, or, you know, people might like, oh, I just couldn't get off the couch all weekend. And that's not me. So it could be, you know, it doesn't have to be this big, huge thing, but it could be like, I got sick. I got sick and I couldn't get out of bed for a couple of days, or I couldn't move from the couch, or, you know, so it could be something like that. It doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing, but it could be a day or two where you're just down and out.
So what are some practical ways people can not feel like they have to do it all?
First, okay, you said practical, and mine is more of a big picture. Then we can get to practical.
Sounds good. I like that. I like going big picture.
Big picture would be, where does your worth come from? Because your worth doesn't come from doing all this stuff. So where does your worth come from? I feel like faith ties into this. Not measuring who you are by what you do. And so I feel like first you need kind of the overarching structure of, okay, what does it mean to feel worthy? What does it mean to feel good enough? And where do you get that feeling? Because I think if you don't have that big picture answer, I think you're just, shooting in the dark. But I think when you have that big picture of, okay, where does my worth come from? If it's not doing all those things, then I feel like that's a release of, my worth doesn't come from this. So I can say no to this because this is not where I'm getting my self-confidence from. This is not where I'm building my self-esteem. And so then there's some freedom there. Once you have that overarching picture, there's some freedom in, okay, what is my capacity right now in this season of life? What is bringing me joy, and what just consistently feels like I have resentment there? And so I think it's to start thinking through, like, what do you have in your life? You could even write it down. That's practical. You could even write it down. Okay, what things are bringing me joy? And like Peter, going back to your example, the podcast brings you joy. And it might not be every single detail of the podcast brings you joy, but if you know that overarching thing brings you joy, then the other things are worth it. Whereas there might be other things that this just feels like a burden, and this just feels like resentment here. And so is there something that I can release here? Or is there something that maybe I can delegate? Maybe I can share with a colleague or my partner, or even like my kids. Like, my kids are getting older and I don't find a ton of joy in housework. So we're starting to delegate some chores. So looking at things like that, okay, what is on my mental load? Listing it all out, and then thinking about, okay, what things can be tweaked? Because I think we can have this feeling like, well, I can't change it. This is just what it has to be. But when we start to get practical and start to list things out, then you can start to see, okay, I think this can change here. I think this can shift. I think there is some room here for this to go differently.
Well, you mentioned you should look at big picture, like, and that can be informed, by faith. And I know for me, one thing in the Bible I think is important to me is that there is an emphasis on rest. There's an emphasis on working hard too, but there's also an emphasis on rest. And I don't know that I do that very well. I certainly don't think our culture does that very well. How do we pursue a value like that? And I assume you would think that would be helpful for this situation we're talking about. I mean, what do you think about that? Yeah,
100%, and totally agree that when you start to prioritize things like rest, it is countercultural. And so just to know, like, I'm kind of going to be a rebel here, and I'm going to prioritize these things. That helps me if I think of myself as a rebel rather than lazy. But I think, so for me, I think about this cyclically. So if I rest and if I prioritize rest, that gives me energy to do the other things that I need to do. And so it's not, I think we put it as rest as a reward, like I got to do all this stuff, and then if I have enough time, I can earn my rest. And I think of it more as a cycle. Okay, I rest, that gives me energy to do the things I need to do. I rest, I give myself energy. So it flows rather than it's a if then. Like it's you do this stuff and then you get your rest. When you think of it as a cycle, it's kind of built in. Okay, rest is just part of things. It's just incorporated in it. And I think when you can see the value of what it adds, and I completely agree with you, I think we have, and so few people recognize, like the Bible values rest. It talks about rest. Jesus' life models rest. And so I'm so glad you pointed that out, because I'm always pointing that out to my clients. Like, look at Jesus' life. He rested. And so if he could rest, you could rest too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of, so this is free therapy for all of us, but like you brought up resentment. So like there's a way to even communicate that. So, when you say, hey, Elena, can you, we're going to have you over, this Friday. So you could respond by saying, that's a self-care day. And self-care is very important, but like there's even a way that you communicate it. Whereas if you just said, hey, I'm not available that day. And I think that that's been kind of the struggle with like church and culture is, and this might be more my personal opinion, is like when people, there's a way to communicate that I think is actually gracious and kind, as opposed to like, we're going to go to, Parks and Rec where, what is it? Treat yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, sure, it's okay to treat yourself, but it's kind of like underwear. I don't want to hear that you have it on. Like, I'm hoping you take rest and stuff. But there's a better way to talk about it. And I think that that's kind of where we're struggling is there's some people that feel really comfortable self-care, stuff on social media. And then there's other people, probably more like myself, that could be a little gracious, where it's like, I want you to get your rest, but like if I'm coming to you with something and you say that, it just, I don't know. I'll let you kind of pick up that jumbled mess.
Weed it out. So I think, so we have like how sometimes self-care is portrayed, which I have a lot of issues with, which you can have me back to talk about that. So I think like self-care, I think, is something first that has to be internal. And I don't even think that has to be by yourself. It could be going to coffee with a friend. It could be getting together for dinner. But I think now we have this like showy self-care. I'm gonna prove to you how good I am at this. And if you're doing that for social media, or if you're doing that to prove something to someone, I would kind of challenge, is that self-care? Like, is that truly for you, or are you trying to prove something to someone else? So like the whole demonstrating the self-care, I do have some issues with. I think it's good to talk about, and it's good to figure out how to prioritize it. But if you need to flaunt it, I'm curious about what that's about.
I love the word curious. And like, there's even volunteers that I serve with that, like, I've noticed maybe they've served a couple weeks. I'll say, hey, can you just take a week off? Mm-hmm. And I feel better about that. But no, I think that's a struggle, because I love self-care. I think it's really, really important, but it's one of those terms that we've maligned a little bit. I want people to have it, but if you're kind of using it for a reason to say no, I mean, that's kind of like, not that anyone would know this, the guy in college that, asks the girl out, and, she says, I can't do this because I'm praying about it. It's like, just say no. Just say no.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good point. Like, are we using that as a built-in boundary? Kind of like what we were talking about with the pandemic. Like, it's a pandemic, so I can't, instead of saying like, no, I can't this week, or like, I'm really at capacity right now, and so I'm not able to do that. Like, are we using it as a shield instead of giving an honest answer of like, no, I don't have the space for that, or this week's not going to work. How about next week? Like, that's one way that I say no to things that I really do want to do is, I can't this week, but how does this date look? Or how do these 2 or 3 dates look for you? Mm-hmm. So I really resonate with what you're saying, because I think it has become another shield. Like, nobody can argue with self-care. So I'm going to say self-care instead of maybe setting boundaries that are appropriate for now, and maybe being able to have a real conversation about what's going on in your life.
Man, this went by way too fast. We are going to have you back.
Okay.
Listeners, you heard me say that. So we close this. We realize that not everybody that listens to the Why God Why podcast goes to church or believes in Jesus. So we're glad you're here. But we always ask this question: what does Jesus have to say about this topic? We all hint at it. So the great part that you have is Aaron and I answer this question, and then you get to clean up whatever heresy or misinformation or terrible mental health.
Pull the weeds out, like you said.
Pull the weeds out.
Pull the weeds out. Treat yourself. Tom Habershat. There you go. What was the woman's name? There was Tom and from Parks.
Donna.
Donna
Meagle.
Oh, I love Donna. Love Donna. Anyways, you want to go or me?
I can start. Sure. Yeah.
Knock it out.
I think this is a great topic. It's an important topic, and it's a great question. I think it's the desire to do everything is I think it's strong in a lot of people. It can be overwhelming, and I think in different ways that you've talked about, Elena, during this session. For me, I think, it is a challenge. I am a Christian, so it is a challenge to me. It was great when you said Jesus rest. I mean, if my Savior can rest, I can probably find time to rest too. But also, it's a command too. There's a Sabbath command, a whole day that was supposed to be a day of rest from regular work. And how do I apply that to my life? I think it's something that's an ongoing thing I need to think about, as well as also need to apply, and not just think about, but actually take steps to apply. So I think it's a great conversation, and I'm enjoying this and looking forward to chewing on it some more too.
Yeah, I love that. And I just kept on thinking about every time Elena talked about know your values. So if we start really, really big picture, Jesus came to give you life and life more abundantly. So if you start there, like, I don't think Jesus is calling you to live this terrible, resentful, bitter, upset, busy life. It's going to be hard because we live in a broken world. But if you start there, then you begin to start having some practical ideas about even reopening, what that looks like. You have some decisions to make. So there's two thoughts that pop in my head. Number one, I just heard a podcast with Annie F. Downs. She wrote this book called That Sounds Fun. She believes that Americans don't do hobbies well, long story short. But she gave this piece of advice. She said, I work really hard, then I pick a day. And she puts this day on the calendar. It's only for fun stuff. And I just thought that's super practical of kind of saying, I'm not going to put anything in there. I'm unavailable. I'm at capacity, all the things you said. The second thing is I think of one of our former guests. His name's Mike Keys. He wrote a book called Leading Brilliantly. And one of the things he talked about was creating a model week. And I don't think people sit down and say, you know, man, Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to go really, really hard. But I'm going to start easing, we're recording this on a Wednesday. So I'm going to start easing on Wednesday, Friday even. I might even, he made a recommendation to me. He's like, try your best to be home Friday afternoons, 3-4 o'clock, make dinner for your wife. You heard that right. So like just even trying to think of stuff like that. And for our listeners, that's going to be very different. But I think that if you start with values, there's going to be certain seasons you pick a day, but also just kind of looking as the world reopens, I can't do it all, but what does like the best week look like? So those are my thoughts.
I love that. And I think that takes a lot of personal ownership of, okay, what does this look like for me? What does my life look like, and how can I structure it in a way that I feel like it brings some more joy in there? Because I think maybe this is like the rounding it all out, is I think that's part of faith too, is joy. And we lose that when we are trying to do all the things and hustling. We lose that joy. And so I think some people's lives and calendars might look a lot more full. And if that brings joy and that they feel like they're living in their purpose, they're awesome. But some people's might be less. And that's awesome too. If that is feeling like that's aligned with your purpose and your values and you're finding joy and contentment there. So I like that, like, this is individual. How can you do this with your week? And I really do think I think faith, I think Jesus's life models, sometimes you work really hard, sometimes you go hard, sometimes you take a nap, sometimes you sit and eat a meal and talk with your friends. And so knowing that there's freedom there, there's freedom to know what it looks like in your life, and know that there's not one right answer. Know that there's not like this one ideal way to do things, because I think that's a trap that we fall into too. So knowing there's freedom there's a lot of room for this to be tailored to you and your family and your season of life.
Wow. Elena, where can we find you on the interwebs?
Yes. So I'm most active on Instagram. It's Elena Talks Therapy, and I post pretty often on there. And so if you want more information about me, I'm not taking new clients at this time, but I do have a workshop coming up on this topic. So Instagram is the best place to find me.
I'll get some details. We'll post about that even if it's before this episode comes out.
Okay.
So contrary to what I said about email, the best way to get in touch with Why God Why is to subscribe to the email. Elena helped me process through that. So make sure you subscribe, get that going, and look for us at whygodwhypodcast.com. Thank you so very much.